Okay, folks, we're on lesson 2, and you should have already started up with watching the introduction video and watching the Lao Tzu video, and have kind of a good idea of what we're doing already. I do know some of you have run into some bumps, and I'm going to address some of those issues right now, just to make sure everybody's caught up in getting moving along. And I should say many of you are doing quite well. If you are running into a bit of a bump, that's not a problem at all. If you're having a little bit of trouble with the Lao Tzu or understanding what you're supposed to do with the readings, that's fine. At the first couple of days, and I'm going to go over those issues, you can get right up to snuff and get things going, get caught up with everybody else if you jump on it. So I'm going to address some of those issues and go through some of that here. I'm also going to go a bit into the calendar, make sure people know when the first essay is coming in, and getting that going. And then I'm going to review a little bit with ideology on Lao Tzu, and also get you set for Plato, because Plato's kind of weird. And if you've already jumped into him, he's about as nutty as Lao Tzu is. So we're going to go into that, and I'll set some things up. And he should make some sense too. It's a very famous piece called Allegory of the Cave from his Republic. But let me go through a few things here. Let me first touch on the readings, because I know there's been a couple of issues with that. Let's go into the readings. And what I did was to create an RTF file. I know some of you have had trouble with this. Now, this first version is a PDF. If you're not aware of what PDFs do, they're read with Adobe Acrobat. And almost everybody has an Adobe Acrobat reader, an Adobe reader on their computer. These files can be swapped all over the place and read almost anywhere. You should have one. But I know some people have had a little bit of trouble. But the first thing you need to make sure you do is that you download it onto your computer, okay? What I just did right now is I opened it within my browser. I did not download it onto my computer, okay? Stick with me on this. I know some of you know this, some folks don't. Hit the download, and I'm gonna put it on my desktop. I already did, so, and what you want to do then is, and I put it on my desktop as a file. Here it is right here, PDF. And then I open it up. And there you go. Now, most of you should get something like this. And it allows you to mark it up and highlight the things that you think are important. You should go to Tools. You can do the comments and things like that. And all those kind of things. So, with that, and I've got the, if I know where I am here, here's the marker and everything. I can, let me use the highlighter. I can highlight ideas that I think are important and things like that. Under these, there we go. I highlight this one, and I like that idea. And I can go through and highlight things. Those are the kind of things you need to do, along with making some comments. You can do it with this, the comment thing. I added an extra one here. Lao Z finds people easy to rule. And do things like that, and add your comments to wherever you need to. And that comment is now within the text. And things like that. Now, one thing is to note, this is your reading, as in this is for you. Make comments and remarks for you to actually go back to later on. What we're doing here is preparing to get ready to write the essay. So you want to find about 2 to 3 things per page. And so maybe you find this, you think this is a neat thing. You think that one's interesting, and you want to comment on it. So where did it go? Lao Tzu finds that lower level people and states are more peaceful. I'm just, writing things to notes to myself. And this will allow me later on to decide what I want to use for my essay. It also gives you kind of a running tally of what's going on in the reading, and gives you a notion about what the structure is of it, okay? So I can turn off my note, or put my notes off to the side that way, or I can turn it back on, whatever. So this is in Adobe Acrobat. This is the reader that allows you to make notes on it. Now, some of you have said that you cannot, get that going, or it's not working on your computer. But all I want you to do is highlight things that are important to you and note things. If you absolutely must, what you can do is print it out, write notes on it, and you can get that into me at the end of the semester. So I will allow you to do that. But I would prefer that you just kept it in Adobe Acrobat and turned it back in as a PDF by the end of the semester. Just make sure you save it every time you're done marking it up. What you should have by the end of the semester is a thoroughly marked up document where you could actually review things and go over things and note what's important and be in really good shape regarding this. But what this does is it gives you a text to work from when you go back and you start finding your evidence. On Monday, we're going to start working with what you've put together on the 4 authors, on Wollstonecraft, on Machiavelli, on Plato, and on Lao Tzu. You should make sure you kind of go ahead and read a little bit on the other writers, on Machiavelli and Wollstonecraft, just in case you're possibly interested in them. Okay, so that's the PDF, and that's what you should be doing. And if you have to do it by hand, you can. You're just going to need to send it in to me by the end, because this is a distinct assignment to be sent in by the end of the semester. And you're going to use this to prepare for the quizzes and stuff. So that's the whole idea behind it. It gives you a comprehension, something to refer to, a study tool, to put together your understanding of the reading itself. Okay. The other possibility now that I tried to put together for you folks, if you can't use the PDF, and you can save it. I'm not going to save this one because I'm going to put one together for you guys later on. Is you can actually get a, I put up an RTF file. Now an RTF file, for most folks, it opens up in any word processing file. Word, if you're working with, is the most popular one, but if you have Pages or anything like that, it will open up in it. RTF is universal. It goes across all the formats. Almost anything can open it up, except for the most basic text editor. It could still open it up. But I put one on my computer right here, and you can do the same type of thing. So you can mark this up, and again, I prefer this type of a text. This copy always comes out in black. Let me get the proper one. This is the RTF file. I'm going to work from this. You can mark this one up if you want to also. So you can use the RTF or the PDF. It's up to you. And just mark it up according to however you need to. You can use the simple things are using bold for important sentences. Again, about 2 to 3 per sentence or per page, about 2 to 3 per page. And then put a comment on it. The state is very important for keeping peace. I'm just putting a little comment in there, and then you can put your comment in another color, like blue throughout or whatever, something like that. As long as you've got a text to keep referring back to that keeps tabs on what you're doing and what you're accomplishing with the readings, that's what I want you to do. Okay, so you have either the PDF file or the RTF. Everybody should be able to do it on a computer. If you absolutely can't, then you may print it off and write on it by hand, but boy, oh boy, these things are kind of old school. You're in an online class. I hope you can do it. So I'm going to ask you to do it that way. But if you absolutely must and your computer's screaming at you, I understand. Mine does it too. Okay. So that's what you want to get going on the text. That's what you want to do. About 2 to 3 things per page. Marked and commented on very briefly. Okay. Next thing, let me take you to the calendar so everybody knows where we are. Let me take you there. And this is where all the due dates and everything are. I don't put the due dates on the assignments themselves. I put the due dates all on the calendar because my experience has been that it gives students a good overview of what's going on. And some of you guys, I know you're in the other class and your calendar is a different color, and I'm going to come back to Eric's in a bit. This one's kind of pink. I think the other one's black or blue or something like that. But we're on Friday. You want to get the Plato done and then the Wollstonecraft done by Wednesday. If you are interested in writing on Wollstonecraft, and I get a number of students who do want to, but they run into a problem where she's right next to the due date for the essay. I know that's a problem. So if you think you might be interested in writing on Wollstonecraft, who writes about women's rights in 1792, go ahead and jump to her, get her read. She is really challenging. I'll try to get an introduction to her up on Monday. So go ahead and jump on it a little bit early and see if you can get it done beforehand if you're interested in it. But do the same thing. Comment on about 2 to 3 things per page. And then we're going to use that on Monday to set the foundation for the essay. Because we're going to be working from evidence. And you always start essays from the readings themselves, not from an outline or something like that. I'm going to show you a different way to write analytical writing, which is from the evidence. And so we all must start from the readings, okay? So you all must start from the readings. And this is why spending time with the readings is so important. I know a number of folks, and so let me go into the readings now on Lao Tzu and show you what the posting should look like, okay? And so everybody kind of should understand this. On the 10th is the day that the essay is due, the 10th. What you should be making sure of right now is that you've done the readings carefully and understood them as best you can. Go through and comment on about 2 things to 3 things per page. If you do that, you will have a much easier time writing the summaries and classifying the writers as either liberal or conservative. Okay? You don't have to get everything, but you should be able to get something from each and every page of Lao Tzu and be able to put it together for the summary. Now let me show you a really good one that I've caught in one of the classes. This is Eric. And Eric didn't ask for me to point him out, so I thank Eric for allowing me to pick on him for a little bit here. This is a really good summary, okay? He really goes through what's going on in it. There's a couple of quotations in here. You don't need to quote things for your summary. In fact, I would advise not doing it, but it's thorough. And he also classifies it according to the ideology. That's what you want. Now, there are errors in this, and it's probably a little too many quotations in this, but overall, Eric is moving in the right direction, and that he's showing attention to it in an overview. By the end of the semester, this is going to make a 20-page journal. That's where we want to go. I saw a number of entries, of discussion entries, and I won't, pick on folks with them. I saw a number of them where they were very short, about 3 to 4, maybe 5 sentences long. By the end of the semester, that's not going to add up to enough for your journal, okay? So if you do the readings the way I'm asking, in other words, go through, mark up 2 to 3 things per page, make little quick comments to yourself as you go through. Then when you go to the discussion area to write your summary, you're going to have an easy time of it. Just look back at your markings, right from that, you're going to have an easier time, okay? So that's what you want to do. Make sure you're getting that. Now, if you wrote a summary already and you're thinking, oh boy, mine's too short, what do I do? Just go back in and just put a reply on your own discussion post, and just add more to what you've already done. Okay, make sure you've covered the reading, go back over your markings, and just add more to it. That's perfectly fine, okay? Even if if you get this done over the weekend, you get Lao Tzu and you get the Plato done over the weekend, I'm okay with that. I'm fine. With this, the main issue with the discussions area is that you're summarizing things and classifying the writer as either liberal or conservative according to your perspective. Now, again, I'll tell you, I think Lao Tzu is mostly liberal and I think Plato is mostly conservative. If you disagree with me, that is perfectly fine. Perfectly fine. I couldn't tell you how much I'm okay with that, okay? But just go through it first and then classify it one way or the other. So make sure you've got that. If you've got that in place, you've got a good part of the class done, and you're going to be ready to go on the essay on Monday when we're really going to start going at the essay on Monday. And you'll be ready to roll. If you don't have the readings completed, you're not going to have fun. Get those readings done, and you're going to be happy on Monday. You're going to be ready to roll on how to write an analytical essay. For a lot of you, this is going to be the first time really doing this. So work with me on this, get those readings done carefully, and then you're going to do fine with it, okay? So one thing you should try to have by Monday is try to make sure that you have 2 writers selected. have your 2, okay? I'm going to work from that idea that you're going to have 2 when we start the video on Monday, that you're going to have 2 writers. You're going to decide, I'm going to write on Plato or Machiavelli, both of them. I like these guys. These guys are kind of weird and interesting. I'm going to write on Lao Tzu and Wollstonecraft. Get your 2, no matter which 2 they are. Machiavelli, Wollstonecraft, Plato, whoever floats your boat, okay? And if it's weird and you want to write on it, that's a great idea to do, okay? So that's what we want for Monday. And we're going to get going on the essay, full blast. I'm going to walk you through the essay. Now, let me go through the Lao Tzu for a little bit and show you guys a couple of things on him. Now, last time I told you that I think he is more liberal. But again, there are conservative elements in him, and you can take a conservative spin on him. Let me show you a little bit with the reading here. I'm going to go to 57, chapter 57. I did, by the way, reduce this a good deal. I chopped out a number, so you're going to see, like, for example, 58 is missing. That's me chopping it out just to get these what I think is essential for him. And I'm going to go to section 2 here. Notice some of this. How do I know that this is so? By these facts. In the kingdom, the multiplication of prohibitive enactments increases the poverty of the people. The more implements to add to their profit that the people have, the greater disorder there is in the state and clan. The more acts of crafty dexterity that men possess, the more do strange contrivances appear. The more display there is of legislation, the more thieves and robbers there are. This is one of the things I mentioned before, is the dichotomy. When you push in one direction with Lao Tzu, you end up creating the other thing. It goes in the opposite direction. No matter which way you push towards, you're going to have pullback from the other direction. If you push for this, you're going to actually produce that which you tried to fight against. In fact, you're going to enhance it. That's the nature of what Lao Tzu is pointing out. Okay, the more wealth you create in a nation, the more apparent the poverty is. Things like that. Okay, the more educated people you have in a nation, the more apparent ignorance and lack of education is. That's what he's talking about. This inherent dichotomy. It's essentially ironic, but it is basically true. It's a contradiction that holds true that he's pointing out there. And so that's why he wants everything to come down to an even level. That's why there's no hierarchy. Once you start building up, you start pushing things apart, and that's where the discord comes from. And remember, with Lao Tzu, the idea is peace and hierarchies, putting one above the other, putting one in control over the other. And these hierarchies always produce that. One group in power over another, or one individual in a higher station than another. Once you do that, you're creating a conservative structure in the society. Whether or not it's an individual or a class or a group, once they have greater status or position, wealth, anything, knowledge, power, wealth, anything, you create a hierarchy, and you're going to create strife, is what he's pointing out. As long as his end game remains peace, he must avoid hierarchies, and so that's what he's doing. So that's why some of these statements will strike your ears as very, abhorrent. The idea of keeping people ignorant. What he's doing is, once you educate people, you're going to actually be pointing out the ignorance of other folks, and that's what he doesn't want to do. Let me brighten my screen up here a little. So that's where that comes from. And some of the other things, let me go up to a little bit more. On 61, I have a little note on, I wanted to point some things out on. What makes the great state as being like a low-lying, down-flowing stream. It becomes the center to which tend all the small states under heaven. Now, this is one of his many metaphors or similes, however you want to call it. One thing about this, almost all of his metaphors are in human and inanimate objects, water, rocks, air, and other things. He doesn't use living metaphors. When he's talking about human beings and society, he uses non-living metaphors and comparisons that he wants you to replicate. He wants living things to replicate non-living things. And he does that throughout. It's fascinating that he does this, and there's a lot to do with those if you want to make something of them. So I just wanted to point that out. And the last thing before we run away from him is in 75. He talks about this, and this is something I want to talk about because it comes up again in Machiavelli, and it comes up for a little bit in Wollstonecraft. The people suffer from famine because the multitude of taxes consumed by their superiors. It is through this that they suffer famine. Now, and again, this is where I want folks to be clear about that we're not dealing with today's ideologies regarding liberal and conservative. When you're talking about the collecting of taxes, this is actually a conservative use of power over money. If you leave people to use their own money and their own, according to their own wishes and desires, that's actually liberal. And I want you to keep that in mind as you go through the later readings. That is actually liberal. And again, I know today there's some discussions in society about liberal and conservative and taxes and things like that. But what he's arguing for is a lower taxation rate, which puts the state in a less powerful position, less of a monetary resource in taking the money away from the individuals. He thinks they need to be left alone. So that's liberal in that sense, that they hold on to it, okay? So let me ditch that now, and let me go up to Plato and get you going on him. And I'm just going to give you a little bit of background and touch a little bit on the allegory of the cave, just so people understand it. It is, for a lot of people, this is Plato, and it's weird, but this is what he does. And all of his writings, almost all of his writings, he has dialogues, and in almost all of them, he has Socrates as the main character. And that's Plato right there, or at least a bust of what somebody says we think he may have looked like, but we don't know. Socrates, we have a slight idea of what he looked like because we have descriptions in Plato about what he looked like. And Socrates did teach Plato. They did know each other. But we have absolutely no writing from Socrates. He did not write anything. So if you ever hear somebody say Socrates said, well, maybe he did. What you're really hearing is somebody quoting or paraphrasing from Plato. That's what you're hearing. So what we don't ever have in Plato is Plato writing, I think this, this, this. You don't have that. Instead, what you have is Socrates and other interlocutors discussing, debating, and working things out. Did Plato actually agree with Socrates? Maybe. I used to think not. I'm reading a lot of Plato right now, and now I'm starting to think maybe he did. But I'm telling you right now, there's a debate going on in academics. Some people think so, some people think not so. Most scholars do think Socrates is essentially a stand-in for Plato. But there are times when Plato has Socrates, get his rear end handed to him, at least rhetorically speaking. So I think that Socrates probably is not a stand-in. So in this one, most people take it that way. So I'm going to show it to you that way, but I'm going to point out problems with it. So usually the easiest way to work with Plato is to act like Socrates and Plato are essentially the same figure. Okay, you have to, it's, I guess, kind of a literary conceit. You just have to give them that. Okay. So what Socrates is doing here, and this is a selection from the Republic. You may have heard about Plato's Republic. This is a selection from it. It's a book-length work, about 300 to 400 pages, depending on who's formatting it. In it, at one point, they have this passage, which is almost certainly the most famous part in Plato. And it's called the Allegory of the Cave. And it's a story in which Socrates explains extremely effectively his notions about the hierarchies of perception and of ideas and ideals. So, and he says with this allegory, an allegory is a story where you set out boink, boink, boink to stand for boink, boink, boink. That's what it is. It's essentially a metaphor blown up really large, is what it is. And so he sets up this allegory where he says a bunch of people were plopped down in a cave and they had a light flash from behind them and some puppets in between, and all they could see were the shadows on the wall. And that's how they grew up. They had no other concept of anything except for what was on the wall. And so they grew up basically comprehending this two-dimensional world. And then what Socrates has happened is that they get released and go into the real world. And then they go, holy cow, what the heck happened? What are all these things? They would be confused. They would be physically pained. And should you feel sorry for them or mock them or whatever? Well, Maybe, but you could understand what they just went through. So going from this shadow world, or this world of replications, or close to replications of things, into the real world, and that's one level of one level moving to the next level of understanding Plato's idea of forms. So there's a replication of things, and then there's the real things themselves. There's a picture of a book, and then there's the real book itself. And notice this funny thing, guys. You're looking at a picture of the book, and I've got the real book here myself. So what you're looking at is essentially the shadow of this book. That's the image of it. But then there's the real book itself. What Socrates goes on to argue is that there's an ideal form of everything. An ideal form of everything. In other words, real things are essentially images of the ideal. They're once removed from the ideal. So all things have an ideal, and all things are once removed from that singular ideal. That's what he argues with the allegory of the cave. That is not just, and he talks about that model being the model that the states need to follow with setting up their governance. That you have what he calls the philosopher kings. And then these people know the ideal of how states should be ruled. And they train the people who rule the actual state in the real world. And then you have the false world, the replicated world, in other words, the painted or storied or whatever replication of the world that he thinks should be cast out. So he's very clear that you should cast out all the artists and get rid of them, because these people just make replications and deceive people. And that's what he's arguing for. Okay. Now, part of the problem with Plato is that he just used an allegory to demonstrate his idea. And an allegory is a replication of a real-world situation. So he's using what he's saying is useless, and it's becoming very useful. That's part of why many people think that Socrates and Plato don't exactly agree. Okay? So you can probably see the problem with it. What I want you to do with Plato is understand what he's doing, how he goes through this. And it's always questions he's asking of this guy. And Glaucon's a soldier who's not as sharp as Socrates is. Socrates, I should mention too, is also a soldier at other times and has fought in a couple of wars, as far as we know, for Athens. And again, this is around, let's just estimate around 400 to 420 BC in there. That's when Plato's doing most of his really good writing, in that range. So that's when it's from, and Socrates did serve in the military. So some people get the idea he's just making fun of military folks. He's not. He did serve in the military himself. But Glaucon is this figure of a not very sharp soldier who doesn't quite get it. And so Socrates walks him through things and just, clarifies this idea. And by the way, this is a quotation from Homer. This is actually the Achilles telling Odysseus that once Odysseus goes down to hell, or down to Hades, I should say, the Greeks didn't have hell. They had Hades, where the afterlife was. And Odysseus, as a living man, gets to go down and visit Hades. And he talks to Achilles, who has already died and was the greatest of heroes. And Achilles says he would rather be the poor servant of a poor master than to be dead. Even if he's great and famous and known all throughout the world, he's now passed away. And he'd rather be alive and be the poor servant of a poor master than be a famous hero who's passed away. So again, he's using Homer to make his ideas about how poor these replications are. So that's kind of what's going on with Plato. Give it your best with it and see how it works. It's a little funky and it's a little troubling. It's got these built-in problems, but go ahead and give it your best and see what you can do over the weekend, okay? So that's where we are. The main thing I want you guys to do is make sure you get the readings in line. I'm not going to post the assignment sheet just yet. I'm going to put it up on Monday, and then I'm going to start walking you through it with everything. Right now, your primary goal should be to get those readings going. Make sure you've got the Lao Tzu in good shape. Make sure you got the Plato in good shape. I would get going on the Machiavelli. A lot of people like Machiavelli, especially after Lao Tzu and Plato. They're like, yeah, Machiavelli makes some sense. He rattles cages. That's good. Wollstonecraft is complicated, but she's pretty engaging too. So get these guys done, and then jump on those guys and see what you can do with it. And then we're going to start the essay on Monday, okay? All right, take care, guys. You're starting off well. You're doing fine so far.